Hello. Slightly farther away camera angle so that you can appreciate how adorable my cat is. Hopefully the audio is still fine. Let's see what we're talking about today. My boy, my main squeeze, Nietzsche. So let's see, how can I give context without... So I used to be really into philosophy, and a friend of mine recommended that I read some Nietzsche, and I immediately fell in love with his writing. Do you have a potato? Finn brought me his potato. The first book I read of his was Genealogy of Morals, which is, I think I've read like 7 of his books at this point. Thus Spoke Zarathustra I've read like 3 times. Genealogy of Morals I feel like is the only book of his that's really a philosophy book. All of the others are a lot more like, I don't know, like just him like saying stuff, which I guess a lot of philosophy is just people saying stuff, but Genealogy of Morals like does much more to like lay out a philosophical framework and defend it in a sense. But yeah, for whatever reason, during the time in my life that I was introduced to Nietzsche, I just must have needed something that his writing had to offer, because it felt like he had this magical quality. Like his books and his writing had this magical quality where I could be having just such a hard time. I was really depressed a lot during that time, and just generally having a hard time. And I could sit down and read like 1 page of Thus Spoke Zarathustra and it would turn my whole day around. His words truly had that much power for me. And what's so interesting to me about Nietzsche is that the space that he occupies in the cultural milieu, like for people who have just heard the name but aren't really that familiar with him, or for people who are interested in philosophy and understand his position in history and in philosophy and all of that, but maybe haven't necessarily read like a full-length book of his. It seems like he has this reputation and like connotations that are totally different from my experience of him. And honestly, I'm not really that interested in trying to litigate like how correct or how accurate my perception of him and his work is compared to the general, not even consensus, just like the general vibe. Alien. Because I feel like, I mean, not that it doesn't matter, it's just not something that I'm really interested in doing. And also, like, I am not a philosophy scholar. I never have been and never will be. So I completely defer to true philosophy scholars on like what his message actually was and what his work actually meant and all of that kind of stuff. I am more interested in, I guess, making the point that it's possible for different people to have completely different experiences reading the exact same work, and B, the value that you can get out of a written work doesn't necessarily depend on what the writer meant or wanted to convey. because truly I cannot overemphasize how important and valuable Nietzsche's work was. And I feel like I'm mostly through my Nietzsche phase at this point. Um, I have a box of, like, a wooden box that I keep all of my favorite quotes in, and probably 95% of them are Nietzsche quotes. And I used to, like, I would pull a quote out of the box anytime I was feeling down and just needed like a little boost. Uh, so that gives you some idea of the role that his work played in my life. Um, but oh, my point was that I haven't looked in that box for like many months now. So I think I'm pretty much through that phase. But like, okay, I think I kind of lost my train of thought. What I want to do is sort of, I want to share what my experience with Nietzsche was, to maybe encourage some of you who might not be drawn to him based on the normal way that he is described or portrayed, but might actually discover some value in his work. So the main thing for me is everything he wrote, but especially Thus Spoke Zarathustra, has this quality of life affirmation, just this sort of exuberance about being alive, and this immense appreciation of life just because it's life, not even because it's necessarily good or enjoyable. In fact, I mean, anybody who's at all familiar with Nietzsche knows that his life involved a great deal of suffering, largely physical, but also emotional and relational. I think he also died at like 44, so crammed a lot of suffering into a very short time. But yeah, so like even in the face of suffering and things being bad and unpleasant and everything, just almost as a premise, almost as a given, just this attitude of this is life is what we have, therefore it is good. And a lot of Nietzsche's work he did a lot of work critiquing Christianity, and I think one of the ways that his work can be understood, or his perspective on life can be understood, is to kind of contrast it with the Christian perspective, where the Christian perspective, if you aren't careful, and sometimes even if you are careful, can really devalue this life and this reality in favor of the next life and the afterlife, this other reality that we are not currently privy to. And Nietzsche thought that just was a huge error, and not the way that humans should live life. And so yeah, it was sort of like his writing very much has this like attitude of almost rebellion against suffering. Like no amount of suffering was going to make him stop loving life. And that, for me at that time, and still now, is very powerful, especially with the way that he writes. He writes very poetically, very artistically. Half the time you're not really sure what he's trying to say because it sounds beautiful, but it doesn't necessarily make sense, or it seems like he's contradicting what he wrote in a different book or what he wrote 2 sentences ago. So so much of it is just like a vibe. Like you just read, and that's why you kind of, in my opinion, to really get a taste of Nietzsche, you really do have to read at least one full-length book, if not a couple, because he's like painting a picture, painting a vibe, painting an energy. It's not something you can sort of like logically wrap your mind around, like A, therefore B and C. Like that's just not the way that he writes. And that, I think that's why, at least for me, he had such an effect, because it really, like, again, for me personally, his writing really had the ability to like change my emotional state and change my attitude towards life and towards suffering. And rather than like trying to avoid suffering or make it seem not as bad as it is, he really was master of like sort of affirming the suffering, like, yes, this is bad and this sucks and I don't like it, but also like bring it on. Like I still choose it because this is what I have and this is my life. Uh and let's see. I'm trying to remember like the other main themes from his work that really made an impression on me. Um, I think I think he almost offers like an alternative spirituality for people who for whom the main religions don't work for whatever reason. I was one of those people, but who still who find the secular materialist attitude towards life to be kind of lifeless. And it's not that he adds anything logical. Like, as far as I can tell, he is a materialist by definition. All of his writing comes from the perspective of like bottom up, like we are first and foremost biological organisms, and all of the things that we think of as extremely like uniquely human and transcendent, and things that set us apart from animals, things like morality and religion and just like abstract concepts in general. Uh, that's actually a big part of what genealogy of morals is about, is sort of tracing an evolutionary history of morality and proposing like a kind of evolutionary mechanism by which humans developed moral attitudes. So like I could definitely see a certain type of person reading Nietzsche and feeling like he's just kind of like shitting all over their spirituality and the things that they believe in and the things that they feel like give meaning to life and make humans unique and all of that kind of stuff. But for me, it very much had the opposite effect, because he kind of combines this critique of, or not even critique, he combines this very materialist worldview of like, yeah, all of these things that you hold so dear, like grew out of your biology, grew out of the collective biology of humans over a vast period of time. It's not like, none of that is telling you anything real about the world. It's an adaptive evolutionary mechanism, just like any of the other physical traits that we would think of. But he pairs that with this kind of transcendent attitude towards life itself. So like almost as if he's saying, like, you don't need religion or like abstract morality or these like high abstract concepts. Like, you don't need to hold those things as sacred because life itself is sacred, and that's enough. And I had really been looking for that. I used to be Christian. It didn't really work for me, but that's a story for another time. Um, and but like everything inside of me rebelled against the sort of common secular materialist attitude. Maybe in part because so much of the secular, non-religious, materialist like culture that I had been exposed to was very focused on like being against religion. Like, God isn't real, God is stupid, religion is stupid, Christianity is stupid, and everybody who believes it is dumb, and like nothing nothing is real, nothing matters, blah blah blah. And it felt like, you know, going down that path, you're just left with this like husk of a life that does not feel beautiful and doesn't feel magical. And somehow Nietzsche's work gave me the transcendence and gave me the beauty and gave me the magic back, without, in a way that was still consistent with a worldview that is based on material reality and biology. Um, and that was incredibly valuable for me. And also just from he was very introspective and very interested in religion and in morality. In his life, he was a philologist, which I think involves like the study of like the classics, like ancient Greece and Rome, and the philosophy and language of that time. I'm probably getting that kind of wrong, but um, so his books also have a lot of really interesting explanations, I guess, for why things are the way they are in terms of like psychology and philosophy. He very much just like says stuff and doesn't really try to make a case for it or explain it or defend it. He clearly has a very robust worldview in his head. He's dead. He did clearly have a very robust and comprehensive worldview in his head. And as you're reading his work, you're just kind of getting like snippets of that as like random little like observations about reality. But for whatever reason, all of them seemed to me to be filled with so much wisdom and to have so much more explanatory power for things that I've observed in the world than many other philosophical attitudes or perspectives that I've been exposed to. And it makes his work kind of fun to read too, because like it's very much like little chunks, rather than like really long chapters or sections or whatever. So yeah, I probably have more that I could say about Nietzsche, and maybe I will eventually, but yeah, truly one of the most influential people, dead or alive, for me. And all the sort of like harshness and almost like darkness or like threateningness and all of those kind of connotations that I or in like the God is dead, as if he was the one to kill God and wanted religion to die, wanted God to die. Like all of that, like seemingly common perception of Nietzsche does not at all reflect what my experience was with his work. So if you have any interest in philosophy, or if anything I said intrigues you, or if you are somebody who for whom religion doesn't really resonate, but you're looking for a more transcendent, a more spiritual perspective, yeah, check out one of Nietzsche's books.